evening, and we're pleased to have with us our guest from Oahu, Lowell Kalapa. And the point of all this is to inform us more about some of the economics in our state. But we'd like to begin, if you would all mind rising, we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Be seated. Ask Ava to come, and Lowell, if you come, ask Ava to give a lay and welcome to you. And Ava, would you lead us in a prayer?
We're going to ask an invocation, so I would like for you to stand, please. Father, we ask that you give us minds to see clearly, ears to hear, hearts to be open, and we ask that you illuminate us and guide us in this meeting tonight in Kona, in our island, in our state, and in our nation. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Okay. So I'm going to just do a little introduction and tell you how we're going to sort of coordinate this meeting this evening. The overall arching theme is we're hoping to see a change in thinking about economics in our state. And the question is, what needs to change and how do we get there? And so this event, as well as when we did in October, some of you may have come to the Sheila Weinberg event. Was anybody there? Some of you? Okay, a few of you were. She spoke about, she comes from the Institute of Truth in Accounting, and spoke about the 50 state study she did, showing how far each state is in debt and how much that is per resident, and Hawaii was the 47th on the list, $25,000 per resident. And so that was our first meeting that was in this sort of series of meetings we're hoping to have about the different aspects of the economics of the state. So this is our second meeting, and we asked Lowell if he would come and join us. Did any of you listen to his interview with Malia Zimmerman? How many saw that? When he basically reviewed the entire 2011 session, the taxes that were passed and the implications. And when I saw that, I thought there's some real value here for us to learn more in depth and give an opportunity also for question and answers, which we're going to do tonight. And so that was kind of the core of thought. Now, as I've been driving back from the airport this evening and talking with Lowell, I've learned that this is just one dimension of some of the activities he has. He's on a number of boards. He's got some affordable housing projects that he's in the middle of. And just returned from Germany a couple days ago, consulting with the German government about housing projects. So multi-dimensional gentleman we have with us this evening. And we've got about an hour and 45 minutes, so it's not going to be a whole presentation by him. One of the things he said he'd like to do is get a feel for some of you, who you are, and understand a little bit what your interests are. And then sort of the main components were the content of his interview in June with Malia Zimmerman that talked about some of the specific taxes that were passed and what that's doing to our economy. I mean, that's very important. So there'll be a section when he feels how he wants to handle it to kind of go through some of that, and there might be some questions and answers. And then I also would like him to, from his perspective as a man who's been doing this for 35 years in Hawaii, and I've lived here 35 years, and I've read his newspaper columns in the West Hawaii Today most of that time. This gentleman knows this state. He knows the finances. So I think we're privileged to have him here, and not just to make a presentation, but also to interact with us. You may have some pet concerns in this time frame that we have. There'll be time for that. So we'll probably somewhere along the middle take a break. And also I want to just mention that we've got 3 main sponsors here. There's the Grassroots Institute, Small Business Hawaii, and Kona Tea Party. And we've been working together to share of speakers. Sheila Weinberg was brought in by the Grassroots Institute, and we've asked Lowell to come over. And so we're hoping to do more of this. And the intent is to get all of our understanding raised. And I think all of us understand the more we are aware, the more we can have a good influence, help direct the state in the right direction on our local affairs.
I try to customize my presentations to the audience that's with me this evening or wherever I am, be it a Rotary Club or Lions Club or whatever, because I think I want to know who you are, what your concerns are about. And I heard a lot of the word politics. I would like to think the word is community. It's community. It's about relationships between you and me, you and your neighbor, you and your business, you and whatever. Politics kind of has become a description of the fighting that's going on in Washington. Partisan politics. And that's the reason I think we're having the problems we're having in Washington. It's politics. We're working on our politics, not on our community. And that's really where I come from. I think that we need to do everything possible to strengthen our community, to strengthen the infrastructure under all of us so that we feel confident in the leaders in our government. The problem is the leaders in our government have no experience, truly have no experience. And I don't know if some of you get the Honolulu Daily, the Star Advertiser, and I was quoted in their political columnist's commentary to say that I was at a recent gathering of alumni of Kona School, which of course the president is a fellow alum. And there's really a division of the House. Those people that were there that were closer to retirement were a little bit more reserved about where our president is coming from. And partly because what is happening in Washington is affecting the outlook for their 401ks, their retirement plans, their pensions, and that is a concern. The younger side of the House, they're still enthused. They still envision. The problem is, again, the vision has no underpinnings. There's no real sense of understanding the economy that we're in, the financial situation that we're in, and the importance of all the players at the table. I don't know how you feel, but I really feel that the 99%ers don't know what's going on. They need a cause. They're out there rabble-rousing, and I come from the Vietnam era. I remember, we need to go to Washington, D.C. and protest. But we had a cause. We had a cause because we didn't want to be in war. We didn't want to be in conflict. But the 99%ers truly don't understand what their cause is. They're still searching. They have focused on those rich 1% people, those bankers who got us in all this trouble, but they truly don't understand the economic underpinnings of our nation. The fact that, okay, we didn't catch a few bad apples in the basket, they went rotten, it threw the whole system off, but there's a role for people who hold the wealth of our nation. And those people aren't necessarily all bad. In fact, some of them, as you know, like the Bill Gates of the world, have gotten together and pledged most of their wealth to good social causes in our world. So they have a conscience. It's not like we don't have a conscience. So are the 99%ers protesting against Bill Gates? Or they just don't understand the role that the wealthy play in our economic system? And I like to say, okay, I really would like to change, I really would like to create jobs, but hey, you and I don't have the capital necessarily to create the jobs that our people need. Who's going to create them? It's that 1% that they're protesting against. They're the ones that have the means by which to invest back in our economy. And that is really where we are today. The problem is a lot of those people are uncertain about our future. And they are uncertain whether or not they want to invest. And they are uncertain of what government's going to do them. The real problem that we're faced with today is the uncertainty. Now, I don't know how many of you have a clear memory of this, but I do because I was about to board a plane in Washington, D.C. 2.5 years ago, the last week of September, the first week in October. And if anybody can recall, that was the bailout. That was the bailout of the financial institutions. And I had been there to be a part of a think tank with the Brookings and Urban Institute. And part of our discussions was, what are the ways that we can solve the financial situation of the nation? Meanwhile, Congress is over there, both the House and the Senate, negotiating all week. This is the weekend. I'm coming home on Monday morning, getting on that plane, and the good news, they reached an agreement. The House and the Senate came to an agreement on the bailout plan, $780 million. And I said, terrific. All of our work with Brookings really came to fruition. We found a middle ground for everybody. I get off the plane in Los Angeles, and I go to the lounge, and I look at the TV, and I see the House just voted down the agreement. Now, I didn't care how much money it was. The really important point was, after they told everybody we solved the problem, the House pulled out. The House said no. Nancy Pelosi decided to tell her members to vote no. The message she sent is the message that shuttered the nation. It told us we cannot have any faith in our elected officials to step to the plate. It's called lack of confidence. And that is what has driven the disaster we faced for the last 2.5 years. It's the lack of confidence in our elected officials to deal with the problems. There isn't an FDR that's stepping to the plate and saying, we're going to do this, like it or not, whether or not you like FDR's politics or his outlook on the economy or the finances or the depression. He made a decision. And that's the problem with government today, is nobody in government wants to make a decision. I confront that all the time locally, state and local government. Well, we'll think about it. Well, let's study it some more. You know, we really think that we need to have more. Make a decision, guys. Right or wrong, make a decision. Because as the old saying goes, not to decide is to decide. You make no decision, the ship just drifts. And that is where our nation is. Congress, whether you want to call it partisan politics or not, is not willing to go put their name on the bottom line. They don't want to make a decision and possibly be blamed for it because it may be wrong. And that's really where our nation is. It's not the finances, it's not the fact that people aren't willing to or don't have jobs, it's the fact that people don't have confidence in government. If any of you are still playing the market and you're doing your research, you know that most of our corporations in America are sitting on a ton of cash, lots of money. Even Bank of America, which everybody rails about, they're getting out of all of their bad loans. It's a great investment opportunity. Buy in now because they're going to be a very strong financial institution because they're solving their own problems. But a lot of our manufacturing corporations are sitting on a ton of money because they don't know what the heck Washington is going to do to them. This president has decided that the best thing he can do is to make sure all you bad guys out there don't do bad things. So I'm going to regulate you. And so all you bad guys out there are saying, well, how are you going to regulate us? And until we know, we're not going to spend our money. Because if we decide to build a manufacturing plant in Scranton, Pennsylvania, you may decide that's not where government wants you to manufacture things, and here we will have spent millions of dollars expanding our business in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Well, we need some certainty out of government, and that's certainly not what we're getting. Enough of the national scene. What's happening locally? Why are we in the pinch that we are? Ladies and gentlemen, as you may have heard from Sheila Weinberg, we're $25,000 per person in debt as far as the state is concerned. And she's saying it's partly because our accounting systems are broken. On one hand, we're talking about cash. On the other hand, we really should be looking at our spending on an accrual basis and therefore booking expenses as they're incurred, even though the money is not spent. That's all true, and it's all part of the problem because, ladies and gentlemen, we do use accrual, for those of you who are accountants. We do use accrual as far as our comprehensive annual financial report, or CAFR, because that's what GAAP tells us to do. We have to book things when we incur the liability, even though we're not going to pay that money out for maybe 25 years from now. The problem is on the other side, when we budget our spending every year at the legislature, we budget on a cash basis. So we look in the coffer, in the piggy bank, shake it, and if there's money in there, we can spend it. And we usually spend all of it. The problem is spending all of it commits future generations to a lot of debt. And that's the problem the legislature's faced with. They have gotten themselves into this huge pit of programs that we should have never gotten into. We've gotten into things that people have come to expect as part of state services. We have told people we can do this for you. And that's really not what government is all about. And I was just telling Dave, I have a minor in anthropology. I study tribes. I actually, familial gatherings, the need to have a bond so that what we can't do individually, we do together. But when government decides to do for you what you should be doing for yourself, that's when they've stepped over the line. That's when they create what we know as entitlements. You now owe it to me because you've been doing this for me all this time. And we lose track of the fact that that's something that we as Americans decided years ago, in order to secure our freedom, that we need to do for ourselves as well. And that's not where our state is. If you look at the vast array of services that the state offers all sectors and segments of our community, you will realize that government has basically taken over a lot of your personal freedoms by providing you with entitlements. Now, Dave mentioned that one of the things I'm very much into is affordable housing. And I have been working for the last, I would say, almost 12, 15 years with the public housing people to kind of turn them around, to think about public housing in a different way. And it's been a struggle, and I hope I'm making progress in these last couple of years. But public housing has become an entitlement. I'm poor, I need a shelter over my head, government, please provide it. And certainly that's the way government was beginning even before statehood. When we built our first public housing project back in 1953, known as Mayor Right Housing, people said, oh, government's providing me housing. How nice of government. 4 or 5 generations later, that family is still there. And that's because government's perspective of public housing is we need to provide you a roof over your head. It's not one that really empowers the families to stand on their own 2 feet. And so they become entitled. We expect this house or this roof over our head. And what we've been trying to do, and I've been trying to do, is to say, no. The motto of public housing is, I'm going to kick you out of here. You should see the social workers. How dare you? How dare you think about kicking people out of their housing? And I said, idea is this should be transitional housing. This should be temporary housing. Government was never intended to build me a house so I can have a roof over my head for the rest of my life. And one of the ways that you do that humanely, to kick them out of housing, is to give them the skills that they need to stand on their own 2 feet. I admit, some of us are, fall into a bad spot, we lose our job, whatever. Or I may not have gone to high school or gotten a diploma, so I don't have the skills, and therefore I don't get a decent job, and therefore I need somebody to provide me with a house. Well, that's fine for the time being. That's fine for the time being. But I expect you to become a contributing member, not politics, but a contributing member of this community. And I can help you do that by giving you those skills. And I kid you not, I work with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the U.S. Attorney across the nation during the 90s had a program called Weed and See. And what it would do was destined to do was to get the criminal element, especially drug purveyors, if you want to put it that way, drug dealers and users out of the community and empower the community to make sure they take back the streets and keep their communities safe and clean. The current U.S. Attorney, when I told her, you know, Flo, would you believe that people in public housing don't even know that they have to get up at a certain time to go to their job? No? Do they do? And that perhaps maybe they need to wear shoes when they go to their job? No? So it told me there's a disconnect with the world out there and the people who are in public housing that they don't understand, don't have the skills to go to work, get a job, take care of their kids, you know, learn how to build a nutritional meal for their family. These are all skills that a lot of those people in public housing don't have. And if our state doesn't address that, that family is going to stay in that unit in public housing for the rest of their lives. They're going to be a permanent liability on all of us as taxpayers. So it is to our best interests that we turn the whole dynamic around to talk about self-sufficiency. To be able to stand on your own 2 feet and, my God, get out of here. Because there's another family right behind you that needs that unit. So when we talk about a dynamic shift in the tectonic plate, if you will, of government, it's this change of thinking for government leaders to look at what government's role is as far as our community is concerned. It is not one of hovering over us, taking us under wing, and forever taking care of us. It is one of empowering us. That's why we have an education system, guys. We teach people how to read and write so that they can get a job. We teach them how to get dressed in the morning so they look presentable, they can get a job. Instead, what we've done up until now is we've handed out. Oh, you poor thing, here's a food stamp. Go feed yourself. You know, or here's a voucher. Go get, you know, an apartment. We've got to get over that. We've got to change the mindset of government to look at it as one of an enabler and not one who just hands out assistance. This is a big difference. It's a big shift in thinking of what government should be. Government should be a support. In Hawaiian, for those of you who know Hawaiian, the difference is between kokua, which is a handout, I'll help you, and what's known as kako, which is a support. I will support you so that you can get the skills you need to stand on your own 2 feet. And that's the real big difference that we need in government today, is the understanding that government is not there to hand out, but to support and encourage people to move on, to become self-sufficient. Now, the reason why we have gotten to that point, at least in our state, is because we've had such a generous tax system. For all of you, and I heard, I've been here 10 years, and I've been here 4 years, and I've been here, is that a lot of people don't understand, can I put it in the vernacular, how they have been ripped off by government in Hawaii. We are in the top 10% of states per capita in tax burden. And yet people come to our state and they say, oh, things couldn't be so. You got the lowest property taxes. You know, in Jersey, I pay $8,000 a year for my property taxes. True. Property taxes here are more like 2, 3, maybe 4,000. It's not that much. Excuse me. Gee, your sales tax is only 4%. It's almost 9% in California, right? What people don't understand is we've got a very, very complex and somewhat demurred system of taxation. It's all hidden. So a lot of people, and you know, some of you have been reading my columns recently, I've tried to talk about our general excise tax as how it differs from the sales tax. And the big difference is the fact that our general excise tax is so comprehensive. The fact that the general excise tax taxes not only goods, it taxes not only at retail, but it taxes services. It also taxes at wholesale. So even before you get to the grocery counter, there's been a general excise tax imposed. And because it's taxed on services, it is much larger, it has a much larger tax base than the sales tax that you would find in California. 60% of the general excise tax base is services. 60%. 40% is goods, things. That's the tax base for the sales tax. When you go to California, what you pay on are goods. You pay on the bag of potatoes. You pay on a dress. You pay on a shirt, right?
Food.
But not, no. Oh, that's right, food, I'm sorry. Not on food, excuse me. But in most retail sales tax. It's even higher. But you pay on things. You pay on your oven and range. You pay on the car, automobile. But here in Hawaii, we pay on services. So in Dave's case, his is a service. He advises on how to grade the lots up here so they all have wonderful views. It's a service. In California, he wouldn't be subject to the sales tax because it's a service. Here in Hawaii, he pays 4% on the service and the bill that he renders for his services to grade the lots up here on the heights. Because of that, if you want to translate our general excise tax at 4% into a sales tax, you eliminate the tax on Dave. He's going to say, that's great, right? It's going to be great. But to generate the same amount of money with a retail sales tax structure that taxes only goods, we would need a tax rate that's 2.5 times the 4. So somewhere on the order of around an 11 to 12% tax rate is what we would need here in Hawaii to generate the same amount of money that the 4% general excise tax. And you're correct, I'm sorry. I was not thinking of California. And if we exempt food, the rate would have to be something like 16 or 17%, because food accounts for about 23% of the base. About 1/5 of the base is food. So we're kind of lulled into, well, 4% isn't that bad, is it? And certainly if you go to a store in New York and you see a pair of slacks for $32, and you go to Macy's here and you see the same slacks, you should buy it here because it is only 4%, right? Macy's is paying tax on its rent down here. I guess they're in Kalapa. They're paying a 4% tax on their rent. Not in New York, not in California. Rent is not subject to tax, the sales tax. So you're paying something more because technically the markup on that pair of slacks is going to have to be greater in order to accommodate the tax. It may still say $32, but more of it's going to the state of Hawaii than is going to the manufacturer or Liz Claiborne or whoever. That's because the tax is imposed on everything. So from the brooms that sweep the floors to the window washer who cleans the windows at Macy's here in Hawaii, there's a 4% tax. So you're paying a lot more than what you actually see. And so when one of your family comes here for a visit with you and they say, my gosh, I'm going to run out and shop because your sales tax is only 4%, you better stop them because there is the hidden tax in that. The other thing I think a lot of people are misled about is they seem to forget that, you know, the real property tax in some place like Jersey or California, well, not California. California's a weird, for those of you who come from California. You know, the real property tax generally supports services on the mainland, but it doesn't support here. So our schools are not paid out of the real property tax. Our welfare system is not paid out of the real property tax. The same thing for healthcare services, not out of the real property. It's all paid out of the state income and the state general excise tax. And that's why those taxes have to generate a lot of money, because they're carrying what are very expensive programs, which are usually funded on the mainland at the local level with the real property tax. So you have to look at our taxes here in Hawaii as combined state and county tax to look at the burden. And when you do that and you measure us nationally, we're 5th highest or 4th highest in the nation per capita insofar as tax burden for state and local taxes. We're way up there. And so, you know, again, this may be paradise, but it's a very dear price paradise that we pay here in Hawaii. So one of the things I think, I was telling Dave, is that too often your neighbors, and you're not counting you tonight because that's why you're here, your neighbors just kind of go, well, it's not that bad, right? It's not that bad. It's not like I was paying $8,000 in real property taxes. It's not like I was paying 8 3/4% sales taxes as I would in California. You know, I'm sorry, you're paying probably the highest tax rates in the entire nation for the 3 major taxes that we're looking at across the board: income, sales, and property. They're probably the highest in the nation when you put them all together. Individually, the property tax looks really low. But when you combine it with a high income tax and a high general excise tax, it's a lot of money that you're paying for government in Hawaii. Now, you're saying, that's nice. I guess I should go home and have a drink and I can forget all about this. But you have to be part of the solution too. And I think that it's important to understand that while you're here this evening and you're concerned, you're asking yourself, what can I do to change the direction of government here in Hawaii? What can I do to reverse this trend of where we have gotten ourselves into this huge hole? Now, I don't know if Sheila explained to you, but part of the $25,000 per person price tag she put on the debt that we're carrying is because of unfunded liabilities of commitments that we've made. And these are commitments to our employees in the public sector. I was rather amused the other day, and I don't know if anybody followed it here in Kona, but the Queen's Hospital settled with their nurses, and they agreed to continue a defined benefit retirement plan for the nurses. Now, is anybody confused about defined benefit versus what a lot of companies? Defined benefit says, the company says, you pay in, or we pay in for 25 years, and after 25 years, you're guaranteed $25,000 a month, or whatever. You're guaranteed that. You can never go down because that's what we promised you. Many companies, and the biggest example is General Motors, and why we had to declare bankruptcy, is because they had a defined benefit plan. They had a plan that no longer made any sense because there was no way that a company could continue to pay the benefits under a defined benefit plan. And when the state retirement system, the state health system administrator and I got together and said, you know, this is going to break the bank. This is absolutely going to break the bank. And we moved the employees' retirement system, the state and county, away from non-contributory to contributory. In other words, we started asking people to pay for part of their retirement benefit. That helped to alleviate some of the pressure on the retirement system. But somewhere along the line, after I kind of bowed out and said, hey, we fixed it, I went away, I got other stuff to do, the administrators of the retirement system decided, nah, we can't be that bad to, we got to take care of our people. And they kind of reversed themselves. They kind of made a hybrid plan for the state retirement system. So we're now back in a situation where the state is responsible for some very generous benefits. Now, we've made some changes, but they're still a little too late, but better late than never. And among the changes, I don't know how many of you know this, but anybody who retired or was in service prior to 1998 gets their retirement figured on, well, actually before 1984 they had to be in the system. Their retirement is based on their high 3 years times number of years times 2%. So if you had 30 years in and you were a pre-1984 employee, 30 years times 2, you got 60% of your highest 3 working years. And so if you were making $80,000 because you're now the supervisor, 60% of 80, it's $48,000 in pension income. And income tax free as far as state purposes is concerned. You know, and this was a controversy, and this is where our current governor kind of dropped the ball this last session. And that was, you know, he's right. We should be taxing defined benefit plans because we tax 401k plans. So as private sector moves into 401ks, most of the private sector retirees will be subject to tax on their retirement income, I will call it retirement income, and public employees will not. Because the current state law says if you have a defined benefit plan, all of your benefits are tax exempt for state purposes. It's a real unfair treatment because for those of us who don't have the luxury of having a defined benefit plan, we were forced to participate in the 401k, almost all of our benefits at distribution will be subject to state income taxes. Unfortunately, this governor didn't quite understand it, couldn't quite sell his idea, and it turned out to be gobbledygook. And instead of clearly defining what the problem was, it kind of went up in smoke because he did not have a real good understanding of how the system works. The result is that we're going to be stuck in the future with tax-exempt pension plans. Now, the unfunded liability, tremendous. One of the things that happened along the way in the last 10 to 15 years is that the legislature decided to take the liberty of dipping into the pension fund, or the employees' retirement system, because at that time the law allowed that any earnings in excess of 8% could go back into the state general fund. Could. Didn't have to, but could go back into the state general fund. So when times were good, and remember in the era of the tech bubble and everybody was just dancing in the streets and there were all kinds of earnings to be had, the legislature took the money. They took the money and said, hey, this is excess money. The law allows us to take more than 8% of earnings and use it in the general fund. No discipline, nothing. And that's what has caused the problem. Instead of saying, as you and I know darn well, and I do this with a lot of my organizations where there are employees who are not necessarily financial wizards or akamai as far as their personal savings, but every time I hear somebody saying, well, I want to make a loan against my 401k, or I want to borrow against it, I go, let me have a word with you. No, not a good idea. But I've got a hardship. I've got to go back to the Philippines because my mother died. No, not really a good idea. You know, government doesn't have that discipline. Government took the money and spent it. They spent it. And so they've left us high and dry with an unfunded liability for the pension plan as well as the retirement health benefits. Now that's another gem too. I don't know how many people are aware of the kind of generous benefits we had for our public employee retirees prior to 1998. Did you realize that anybody who was in the system prior to 1998 and retires with 25 years of service has their health care entirely paid for? The premium is entirely covered by you. Thank you very much. And not only do we cover the employee, but we covered the employee's spouse. even though the spouse may not have worked for state government at all. Now you go, wow, I'm in private sector. I don't even get my health premiums covered. I don't even get my Medicare cost sharing premium covered. And yet in state government, it is. And up until very recently, and for all those who are already on the system, how many already, I'm not trying to embarrass you, but how many are already on Medicare? Okay, so when you went on Medicare, what happened to your Social Security check? Shrunk, right? Shrunk by a premium. In state government, oh, no way. We send you a check. So for our state employees who are retired, who reach Medicare age, and get the premium deducted out of their Social Security check, we make them whole. We send them a check and reimburse them for the amount of the premium that's taken out for Medicare. Now, how come they get it and I can't get it? I'm the taxpayer. So a lot of these perks for our public employees, which should have been corrected years ago, was never corrected. And only now, because we're running into this unfunded liability, are they trying to scratch their heads and go, oh, maybe we can take this back here, maybe. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, once you give something away, hard to take back. Just ask your grandchild for that toy back that you gave for Christmas last year. No way. So it's going to be a very difficult task to rein government in insofar as many of these generous benefits that we have granted them. Now you're saying, how come? Why did we give these benefits, generous benefits to our public employees? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand history. And Dave and I were just talking about, if you're not a student of history, you're bound to make the mistake again and again and again. And unfortunately, our current leaders are not students of history. What happened back prior to 1969 is that most of our public employees indeed were paid substantially less than private sector. And that led to it prompted or actually encouraged the Constitutional Convention in 1968 to grant collective bargaining rights to public employees. You can negotiate pay raises at the bargaining table. And that right was granted in 1968, went into effect in 69, but nobody said anything about the benefits that went with the underpaid public employee prior to 1968. Those generous retirement and health benefits were there because public employees were indeed paid a lot less than private sector counterparts. So we went into collective bargaining, and today most of the rank and file in public sector get paid much more than private sector employees. The opposite is true probably for upper tier public employees. So your managers, supervisors, and your higher ranking public employees today are probably still paid less than private sector, as it probably should be, because in private sector we're paying on the basis of merit. In public sector, there is no such thing as merit. There's steps, there's ranges, and if you're there long enough, you get paid more. It's not whether or not you're doing a better job than your peer. It's the fact that you've been there so long that you're beginning to grow a little old in the tooth. And that's how the public sector pays or compensates its employees. And so what happens is that until very recently we had people who had collective bargaining rights, who got higher pay, but their benefits stayed the same as if they were still underpaid by comparison to their private sector counterparts. And that's what's gotten us into this unfunded liability that Sheila talked about in October to you. So, you know, we're in a very difficult situation, as I said. Once you give away something, it's really, really difficult to take it back. And that's why it's been such a struggle for us to work with the legislature to say, you know, you got to rein in some of this spending. And it's not like you're cutting services, you're cutting the benefits that go to the public employees who are way overcompensated. So until we can correct that, government in Hawaii is going to get more and more expensive. So what can you do about it? What can you, as individuals here tonight, concerned as you are, do about it? You need to get involved, I hate to use that word, but the political process. You really need to be out there, not just campaigning for your Republican candidate, but campaigning for an issue. Getting to your neighbors, your friends, your family, and saying, this is what's wrong. And everybody who's in government right now who don't want to change need to be reconsidered, i.e. maybe they need to be shown the door. Partly because they're only going to preserve the status quo. They need to think about the fact that if we don't change the direction of government, we will find ourselves in a situation like California. I can't even fathom what $42 billion worth of debt looks like, but it's a lot of money. And that's where California at least was last year. I don't know what the number is now. But
I don't think it's better.
it's not better, I know that. It's not better than $42 billion. It's hard to imagine that anybody could be $42 billion in debt, but California was last year. Anyway, let me just stop right there, because I'd like to hear what you have to say about the issues that you have. I know many of you have, I don't know, how many people understand the history of why we are as liberal as we are today? Can we talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
A little bit. I've read bits and pieces of it.
I'm sorry?
I've read bits and pieces about it. Oh, just because of the way the plantations were designed and the workers, and how the Democrat Party partnered up with them and essentially put them in power, and Republicans have been dwindling ever since.
Anybody else?
Well, like I said, I've read the same thing, is that the reason that the Hawaiians do not like Republicans is because of the landowners or the plantation owners and the way they imported labor and stuff. But what I see is that the last 60 years, the state's been almost 100% Democrat. And in that last 60 years, now we've got the highest electric bills in the country, we've got the highest taxes in the country, you've got the highest transportation industries in Texas, the highest gasoline prices in the country. And so what has the Democrats done for this state? That's my question, is that they've kind of run this thing into the ground.
And it is really ironic, and I'm not trying to be partisan, I'm sorry, but the very people that party professes is dedicated to help, they're doing the worst possible job. They're making us, in fact, not only the poor, keeping the poor poor, but they're making the middle class poor.
Well, but see, I see it more as it's not Democrat and Republican. It's the attitude of the Republicans at the time that they were the plantation owners. They did not think much of the people, and so that they would think that they could rule over them and keep them by intimidation or whatever method, keep them down and basically keep them as slaves. But I almost think that today's Democrats in this state are doing the same thing that the Republicans did, is that they are keeping the citizens of this state basically as slaves. And that's I don't know what you do about that.
I don't see it as them keeping them as slaves. I see it as the Democratic Party giving them too much, the entitlement programs.
Well, but
it's exactly like he was speaking about with the providing housing and so on. And it buys them votes.
I'd like to encourage us to not think about it as much as Democrat and Republican. Let's think about the principles. We talk about empowerment and public housing. The goal is to shove them out as opposed to allow them to stay. There's an attitude about that no matter what party you're coming from. I think that's one of those principles that I'd like us to focus on. If I taught my kids when they were little, if you want freedom, take responsibility, you get freedom. They go together. If you give responsibility away, you're losing your freedom too.
yeah,
So the entitlement mentality, however it's manifested, I think both parties are guilty of some of this, frankly. You give away the responsibility You just lost some freedom. So if you want to get the freedom back and have liberty, you have to take the responsibility back. And the people that lead the way in that make the sacrifices of taking this responsibility. I think Lowell's idea of building the community is a good one. The question becomes, are you a community? Are you contributing to the community? Or are you taking from the community? Are you a giver or are you a taker? And this high three thing that you mentioned is the pinnacle of taking, as far as I'm concerned. It's like a chess game. Let's see how much we can squeeze out of the system. That's a taking. That's not owning the community and looking at what our grandkids are going to be doing with the mess that we leave for them. So I don't want to focus too much on party here. Let's think about the themes that we need to focus on. I think, well, you've given us a very good frame of reference here. So let's continue, but let's do it in that framework.
When I came over, I had no idea what I was going to do, and I ended up working for the county of Hawaii for 16 years and retired. What I have found is the unions dominate this state, and the unions control the elected officials, in a sense. I fought that. I came from a right-to-work state, and if this state became a right-to-work state, you would see a dramatic change, even a modified right-to-work state. But until the unions are out and don't have the control of the politicians that they now have, you're not going to see any change.
The way politics works in Hawaii, with chairmen of committees suppressing otherwise good bills because it's disruptive to the power struggle, is really appalling. And I think term limits in Hawaii and at the federal level would go a long way to going back to the citizen statesman.
Does Hawaii have term limits?
No, we have term limits at the county level only. Term limits on the governor, and term limits on their mayors. But at the state level, no, there are no term limits at the legislature. There is a term limit on the governor. I don't know if term limits are necessarily the solution. It sounds like a really good thing, but I think California has had experience with term limits. The problem there is you have this turnover and you end up with a bunch of people who are inexperienced.
They're very clever. Well, always there no matter what.
Well, taxes being a lot. So there used to be a little industry. See, Hawaii, we sit here and what I've found is it's really hard to get businesses going here, because every time you turn around you got more regulations to deal with and stuff to deal with. And I came from Texas, and there was at one time a little industry in California that their higher taxes and their regulations ran out of this. They decided to leave your state, and that was Silicon Valley. They've now relocated to Texas, between the Austin and Dallas area. And they came there because of Texas had reasonable, lower tax rates and more freedoms and a little better work conditions. Of course, they don't have the weather we have here and the nice people, which is one of the reasons I came. But it'd be nice if Hawaii could figure out how to encourage more businesses to come here. That's something that might...
Maybe if they were more business friendly.
With that, I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break, get something to drink, and we'll talk about what it means to be business friendly, how we get there, and what was done this last session to either help or hinder our business friendliness. So let's just take a little break.